Hey guys, pre-recording Scarlet here. Just wanted to let you guys know that for today's concept or today's topic, I have tried for a very very long time to try and find decent concept art. I was incapable of doing so. So we're going to have a single photo throughout the entire video. We will not be cycling videos, and I do not under any way, shape or form own these photos, nor do I claim to. The reason I'm saying this is because this image is owned by a big company. You guys will instantly know where it's from if you're into this company. I'm solely using it as a concept. I do not claim to own this, nor will I ever claim to own this. I'm simply just using the photo as a sort of like visual representation. So without further ado, let's get this episode started. The war rages on around you. All you can hear is the cacophony of war. Soldiers nearby shouting, their weapons barking. Off in the distance, various different tanks and armored vehicles firing their cannons, explosions in the distance. Despite all of this, you've grown numb to all of the sound. Then, suddenly, everything changes. The ground has been shaking this whole time because of the explosions off in the distance. Then suddenly, it's as if the very world itself shakes in fear. A titanic, impossible footstep. You try to look behind you when suddenly a massive war bellow explodes across the battlefield, nearly instantaneously deafening you. It speaks of belligerent pride, unearned arrogance, and absolute defiance. Once more, before you can even turn around, suddenly a purple beam shoots across the sky. Everything turns a horrific shade of purple. When it fades, you look at the enemy lines and see that a great war vehicle in the distance has been turned to nothing but molten slag. You finally are able to turn around when another colossal footstep hits. What you see behind you is truly a miracle and a horror. You see a Cyratin war machine. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Cyratin war machines and why they are so cataclysmically powerful. Now, as I said in the pre-recording, this is obviously a photo from Warhammer 40k. These are Titans. Specifically, we have in the bottom left a Warhound. Roughly the middle of the three in the background is a Reaver, and then two Warlords on either side. Of course, I do not own this, nor will I ever claim to own this, because this is 40k and I don't want to fuck around with Games Workshop. But we're using it simply as a concept, so that you kind of get the idea of what these war machines are comparable to. Now, I've referenced a lot that Shattered Legacies is inspired by Warhammer 40k, and Cyratin war machines are an inspiration from Warhammer 40k. However, they're very different. Not only are they different in aesthetic, but they're different in their overall capabilities, and more specifically their weapons. Now we're going to be going over the three different classes, as there are three classes of Cyratin war machine, as well as their similarities with potential Warhammer 40k equivalents in the Titans. After that, we'll go over some of their weapons, as they do have a very small list of their weapons, as well as some other interesting facts. So the three classes are the Lux class, the Albin class, and the Pact class. We'll start with the Lux. Lux war machines are similar to 40k Warhound Titans. They are fairly lightly armored. They only have one layer of shields, and because they're lightly armored, they're relatively agile as far as giant war machines go. Just like with Warhounds, they're primarily used for scouting. And I don't mean scouting as in stealth, because these things are so cataclysmically massive that there's nothing stealthy about them. But they more so will hunt in packs, oftentimes upwards of 6 to 8 Lux war machines. And they're used for everything from flanking enemy positions, laying down hellish amounts of firepower, gaining targeting telemetry for larger war machines in the back, and even identifying targets of interest that maybe the Lux class isn't really capable of dealing with. Now, Lux-class war machines stand at a staggering 40 to 50 feet tall. They're absolutely massive. And we'll go over what weapons it can bring in just a minute, but we need to talk about their structure. So, for the three war machines, or three titans in the background, you have the two warlords on either side, and then you have the Reaver in the middle there, the one that looks like it has a giant missile pod on its top. So, Lux class are similar to Reavers in that Reaver Titans, if I'm remembering correctly, they have their reactor located in their back rather than in their chest, with almost all other Titans. Lux class are the same. This means that despite the fact that they have the least amount of armor and shielding of all Cyratin war machines, they're still unusually durable, because the inside of a Cyratin war machine, it essentially has multiple systems and all that are basically like the skeleton of the machine. You know, we're talking about, this is super simplistic, but, you know, you've got things like fiber bundles, you have hydraulics in there, you have coolant lines and power or electrical wiring and stuff like that. And, you know, it's very condensed. It's built down to almost like the skeletal system in a human body. And then the rest of it is just armor on top of armor on top of armor to make it as tanky as possible. Well, Lux-class war machines have their reactor mounted on their back rather than, like I said, in the actual core of the machine. This means that it takes an unusual amount of firepower to bring one down, simply because if you're unable to flank them, they can take an astonishing amount of frontal damage. Now, you may notice that I said that these things are shielded. Well, that's because they're shielded with null void shields. Now, before you start thinking, holy hell, how are you supposed to kill these things? They're not mega carrier class null void shields. It's the same technology, but it's dumbed down, because that level of power is oftentimes too much power consumption. Not only that, but it's oftentimes questioned whether or not that level of durability and defense is really needed. As a result, whilst it is uncommon to happen, Cyratin war machines are destroyed in battle. Either concentrated barrages from artillery or armored units can bring down their shields and then eventually weather through all of their armor. Furthermore, war machine void shields are significantly inferior. You know, with a mega carrier, they can recharge relatively quickly and then reform the barrier. Whereas the void shields on Cyratin war machines, which I do need to change the name of them because war machine is kind of, you know, but they take a lot longer to recharge, and as a result, it's significantly easier to take them down. It's still very hard, simply because Lux-class war machines are plated in solid corrodium. Now, we've talked about corrodium before. It's essentially the miracle metal. It is feather light. It can withstand an astonishing amount of firepower. It's basically like the best traits of steel and diamond, and then you just take them to truly unrealistic levels. You mix them together and you make them so fucking feather light that a ton of this stuff would literally be like a couple hundred of yards. Or maybe not that small, but regardless, you get the idea. It's incredibly light and somewhat flexible once it's been refined. Now, there are 3 weapon classes. These weapon classes include WMD, or Weapons of Mass Destruction. These are essentially your main battle weapons. These are the weapons that are going to be firing the most. After that, you have support weapons. Think things like an artillery piece that's mounted to the side of it, because why the fuck not? And then you finally have auxiliary systems, and these are oftentimes not necessarily weapons, but systems that are designed to assist the Cyratin war machine in whatever it is doing. Now, keep in mind that these things are similar to Titans. They're capable of unleashing such tremendous firepower that just their mere presence alone, like with 40k Titans, can completely demoralize, is that a word? It basically ruins the morale of everyone around them. Because it's like, yeah, we have a Titan, but it's so powerful. Why are we here? Why are we dying? when we could just throw this thing at the problem? What's the point of all of us sacrificing our lives when this thing has literal world-ending levels of firepower, you know? Cyratin war machines have a very similar issue. Now, obviously, there's the Cyratin Empire, which is fiercely loyal to itself, or at least members of it are fiercely loyal to the Empire, so the morale, shall we say, debuff isn't nearly as strong, but it is still present. So, I don't know if I've said this already, but how many of these different weapons can it hold? Well, a Lux class can hold 2 WMDs, 2 weapons of mass destruction, 1 support system, and 1 auxiliary system. An important thing to know is that, I don't think I talked about it, the exact reactor that Lux class war machines have is a plasmite reactor. Now, we've talked about plasmite before. Plasmite is a substance that cannot be truly explained. Its mere existence is a violation of the laws of physics simply because it is a material that simultaneously exists within a solid, liquid, gaseous, and plasmic state. It exists in all 4 states of matter simultaneously. How it does this, nobody really knows. It's one of the inventions of the Techno Jackson, which basically means this dude is literally the only person that understands how this works, but we have enough information on it to be able to produce it and to be able to use it. We don't understand all the mechanics behind it, but that's okay. We just need to be able to use it. You know, it's similar to Warhammer 40k and, what are they called? STCs, Standard Template Construct. These are basically blueprints that the Imperium of Man will hunt down, well, the Mechanicus, will hunt down, like, religiously in an attempt to get them, because they literally have blueprints of various different devices and technology from the golden age of technology back before the fall of mankind, the first one. And so it's very similar. You know, they understand how to make plasmite, but they don't understand how it functions. You know, a member of the Mechanicus can create and maintain something like a Warlord Titan, but that doesn't mean that they understand how it functions, you know? There was a video that I was watching one time that is like, you know, it's like a mechanic. He can fix the car, he can do repairs to it, he can maintain it, but he's not necessarily capable of creating blueprints for said car from scratch. You know, it's very similar. So, plasmite is capable of producing so much goddamn power that, honestly, I made a comparison a long time ago in one of the earlier episodes exactly how much power a plasmite produces. You guys can go find that. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's like just a ridiculous amount. Like fusion reactors, which is something that we're working on right now in the real world, are considered incredibly primitive when compared to a plasmite. Now, with that out of the way, we can go to the Albin class. And Albin classes are essentially equivalent to Warlord Titans. They're the main battle war machine. You'll see the most of these, usually. They are technically outnumbered by Lux class, but you're more likely to see an Albin class. Now, keep in mind, just like in Warhammer 40k, it's not super common to see Cyratin war machines walk the battlefield. That's not because there's not a lot of them. There are a fuckload of them. But typically they're reserved for the worst case scenarios. They literally apocalyptic wars where millions of people die every hour. Those kinds of wars. Where it's literally fucking Armageddon. You know, that is when Cyratin war machines are deployed. And by and large, that's kind of when Warhammer 40k Titans are deployed. You know, those are the types of battles, unless they're defending a Forge world. But that's irrelevant, you know? And so, whilst Cyratin war machines are almost always on the battlefield, there are times where they're just blatantly aren't on the battlefield. Now, one thing I actually forgot to talk about before we get to the Albin class is the logistics of these machines. What I mean by that is the logistics of ammunition. So, like, for example, I'm actually going to pull the mouse out here, which is something I'd never do. So you can see my mouse right now. This guy down here is a Warhound Titan. And you can kind of see it right here. I believe it's kind of hard to see right here, but I believe that is a Vulcan Mega Bolter. And basically, actually, that Reaver one might actually be one too. I don't remember all of the weapon designs, but basically, a Vulcan Mega Bolter is basically the Astartes Bolter, which is literally, I don't remember the exact dimensions of it, but it's essentially a 40mm grenade with a rocket on the back of it that is fired out of the gun, and these things can go full auto. They're fucking nasty. They hit the target and then they explode like a second after hitting. Like, they're fucking nasty to deal with. But Vulcan Mega Bolters are basically an upgraded variant. But if you actually look at these things, like concept art of Vulcan Mega Bolters, there's clear that there's a magazine on it, which it would have to. You know, it's not like an energy weapon like these. I believe these are annihilation cannons. I could be wrong. Like I said, I don't remember all Warhammer 40k guns, but basically these are energy weapons, plasma, I believe, that pull energy directly from the reactor inside of the chest of the Warlord Titan. Whereas Vulcan Mega Bolters, they use actual solid rounds. Solid, quote unquote. So they have actual magazines. But whenever people are fighting with Titans, you may notice that they never seem to have to reload. You know, like a Vulcan Mega Bolter magazine, given the dimensions of the theoretical bolter round that it is firing, just purely based off of the dimensions of the barrel, there's got to be like 50 of them in there. But when they're fighting, they clearly fire way more than 50, and it's like, how the fuck does this work? Well, it's Titans, it's super advanced technology, who the fuck cares? It's awesome as shit. You know, that's what matters. Well, with the Cyratin Empire, there's actual logistics behind this. So this goes to a type of technology that the Cyratin Empire kind of understand, and that's enough for them to utilize it. So within Shattered Legacies, unless you're the Florians, teleportation isn't really a thing. And this is due just how physics functions. Now, granted, the Cyratin Empire have repeatedly broken the laws of physics a lot, but they still can't get around the impossibility or theoretical impossibility of teleportation. However, they have something very similar, known as relay, or in its full name, tether relay. And what it is it's basically a hyper unstable wormhole that is capable of transferring any matter that goes through it. It is exceptionally dangerous for organic material, but inorganic material is capable of going in and out with basically no consequences. They require a stupid amount of power to keep them open because, like I said, they're naturally unstable. They naturally want to collapse and close. So it requires even by Cyratin Empire standards, a ridiculous amount of power production constantly flowing into it to ensure that this essentially wormhole-like portal stays open at all times. And the way that they work is that this tether relay portal is located basically next to the firing chamber of any weapon that is kinetic. Basically anything that has a solid physical object rather than being an energy weapon. And they're basically belt fed. And on the other side of this tether relay is these massive fucking warehouses that is literally just full of these belt-fed bullets, or bullet equivalent, essentially artillery shells. And that's how they manage to constantly fire without needing reload. Now, for some weapons, this isn't exactly feasible, but for others, it is possible. For those ones that's not feasible, they'll oftentimes have to retreat, get it rearmed, but these types of weapons that can't use tether relay are very rarely used, simply because it is such a massive pain to reload. Like, look at this Warhound where my mouse is still on. This Warhound is bigger than the fucking tank, and that tank is significantly bigger than a modern tank. Like, I'm not sure what kind of tank that is. A Warhammer 40k expert could probably tell you, but like, these little dudes right here, these are Astartes. And Astartes are significantly larger than a human. Like, a human would come up to their shoulder plate, which I'm pretty sure that's Ultramarines. But anyway, their shoulder plate is where the top of the head of a human would be. Like, these dudes are tall, and this tank is even fucking bigger than them. And then you have the Warhound, which is even bigger. So, like, even with Lux class war machines, despite the fact they're the smallest, it takes a monumental amount of effort in order to reload these things. Now, of course, this goes on to the question of crew. You know, how are these things piloted? Well, it's similar to 40K, but honestly, it's more similar to Pacific Rim. So, in Pacific Rim, the pilots are loaded into this, I don't know, what would you call it, a harness? If you ever see Pacific Rim, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Basically, their limbs and back are connected to, again, what I could best describe as a harness, and depending on the movements that they physically make, will essentially be translated into what the machine does. Now, obviously, within 40K, this is one of the reasons why in Titans there are two primary pilots. There's the Princeps, who's the actual pilot of the Titan, but then they also have the Moderati, I don't know. Regardless, and they're basically like co-pilots. You know, each one is in charge of a specific thing. One person is in charge of maybe turning the fucking the Titan. Another one is in charge of making sure that it's walking where it's supposed to. Another one is making sure the guns are aimed at what they're wanting to. But it's the Princeps that is largely in control. You know, when that weapon fires, that's the Princeps firing the cannon. Yes, technically the Moderati is aiming the actual gun to make sure that when the Princeps fires, it's hitting what it's supposed to, but another thing is that Princeps are quite literally neurologically linked with their Titan. They get this sort of like out-of-body experience, sort of. People who know how Titans work, this is a really dumbed-down version, but obviously not everybody watching this will know what a Titan is. But it's basically like an out-of-body experience, and then they're literally part of the Titan. Now, if you're a new Princeps who hasn't been permanently interred into the Titan, this isn't quite as severe, but it's still present, you know. They go from feeling like a feeble human being to becoming, as the Imperium calls them, the literal god engines of war. You know, they become the machine. They feel everything. They literally, like, the details and like all the different readings that you would expect in a mech, it's literally like imprinted onto their mind and stuff. Like, it's crazy. They become the Titan. Whereas the Moderati are oftentimes failed Princeps, so they don't feel as much of a link to the Titan. They still, to a certain degree. Well, obviously this would put an insane amount of pressure on the human mind, or in this case, the Cyratin mind, which normally they wouldn't be capable of handling this. This is going back to Pacific Rim, specifically why they have two pilots, because the mental load is too much for one pilot, so they have two, unless you're fucking goated as shit, in which case you can temporarily run it solo, but you basically have to be a Chad at that point. But with Cyratin war machines is very different. At its very minimal, there is one member, well, maybe not one, there are 2 to 3 members of crew. You have the pilot themselves, and then you have 2 people who are in charge of maybe making sure the reactor isn't about to blow up, you know. But the pilot is aided by 3 different AIs. And these AIs are like real AIs, like Skynet level AI. Maybe not like killing the world with Terminators level, but, you know, actually, no, they're Cortana like AI. Skynet is a horrible example. They're like Cortana from Halo, you know. They're AIs that have their own personality, their own awareness, you know. They are hyper advanced AIs, and each AI is in charge of various different things. One AI is in charge of everything above the waist, one AI is in charge of everything below the waist, and one AI, or the third AI, is in charge of maintaining the reactor and ensuring that the weapons are pointed in the correct direction. And then it's the pilot that is making the primary movements of the Cyratin war machine, as well as firing the weapons itself. So with all of that out of the way, let's finally get to Albin class. So like I said, Albin class is equivalent to Warlord Titans. They're your main battle machine. Furthermore, they stand at 70 to 80 feet tall. These things are fucking gigantic. They are powered by a singular solstite reactor, which is better than plasmite, located at the very center of the torso of the Cyratin war machine. They have 2 layers of null shields, and they can support 4 WMD weapons, 2 support weapons, and 1 auxiliary system. And like I said, they're obviously outnumbered by Lux class war machines, but that's because they oftentimes hunt in packs of 6 to 8 in total, But when you're in an actual war machine engagement, you're probably not going to really be noticing the Lux class because oftentimes they'll be behind enemy lines doing any number of things. Primarily what you're going to see are Albin class. And like I said, they're massive. They're 70 to 80 feet tall. When I was doing that little story at the beginning, that's an Albin class war machine. That's not even Pax class. So Albin class, these machines have so much fucking weight that when they step, no matter how far away you are from them, you can feel their quote-unquote feet hit the ground at over 20 miles away, and it feels like a fucking earthquake. They are insanely heavy. They are easily in the hundreds of thousands of tons, which, look at this big-ass warlord. You would expect that thing to be several hundreds of thousands of tons. It's fucking enormous, And so, oftentimes, just like in Warhammer 40k, when you're next to these things, it's honestly about as dangerous as if you are whatever the Titan is pointing at. What I mean by that is 40k Titans and Cyratin war machines are incredibly dangerous if you stand near them. Their war cry alone is capable of instantaneously killing people that are directly next to it, and even people who are a long distance out will either suffer permanent or temporary hearing loss, just as a result of it giving out its war horn. The weapons alone, depending on how close they are, can quite literally shatter bones and cause massive internal bleeding from the shockwave of the weapon firing. And just like with energy weapons in 40k Titans, any exposed flesh will instantaneously be burned away. You won't get third-degree burns. No, it will literally burn the flesh away. It'll char it and then burn away the charred flesh. These things are so fucking dangerous to be near because they're using such high-yield exotic weapons that are literally designed to take down entire armies on their own. Now, this being said, Lux and Albin class war machines are never alone. They always have a supporting army. Lux classes don't have nearly enough armor or shielding. Whilst you theoretically could send in an Albin class on its own, it's gonna struggle, mainly because its sensors are incredibly advanced, but it never hurts to have Lux class feeding more telemetry and identifying targets of interest. So as a result, these two war machine classes are almost always deployed together with supporting armies. They're never sent in on their own. That is, until you get to the third one. This being the Pax class. Pax class are fucking insane. And we just got over Albin and Lux class. So, with Lux class, like I said, they're essentially equivalent in overall firepower with this guy, the Warhound. Albin class are usually roughly the same as these guys, the Warlords. There is a war machine, or a Titan, that's even bigger than this. This is a Warlord. This is roughly, usually, the second largest Titan. There is a Titan in Warhammer 40k that, unless they've retconned the lore again, is literally the size of the Statue of Liberty in height alone. It is known as the Emperor class Titan, and these things are so fucking insane, they're basically indestructible. Now, for anybody who knows 40k, you immediately know what I mean when I say Emperor class Titan. They are insane. Pax class are worse. Pax class are straight up worse. They're about the same size. They average anywhere between 130 to 150 feet tall. They are loaded with 6 WMD weapons, 2 support weapons, and 2 auxiliary systems. They carry 3 layers of null shields as well as 1 layer, the innermost layer of shielding, as mega carrier class null void shields. They're literally as powerful as, say, the what the hell was the name of it? Hang on. I don't remember the name of the ship. It's the opposite of the Warstock. What was the Warstock's counterpart? The Asmodeus. That's what it was. Their shields are literally as strong as the Asmodeus, and they basically have just as many. They are absolutely insane. They have a total of 2 Solstite reactors inside of them. These things are literally... they're like Emperor-class Titans. When they walk onto the battlefield, there is no fucking hope. Because there's not a goddamn thing that you have that is going to be able to kill this thing. And the level of sheer destruction it can unleash is... again, I know I say this a lot, but it's literally apocalyptic. And, like, the thing I love about Emperor-class Titans is, okay, so you have the Warlord, you have the Reaver, you have the Warhound, you have the Reaver, you have the 2 Warlords. They look like battle mechs, like what you would expect a big fuck-off robot to look like. And then there's the Emperor class, which literally, like, up here on his shoulders, there's obviously weapons mounted there, you know? And it's essentially like pauldrons to protect them. No, on Emperor-class Titans, there's literally a fucking church. You heard me right. A church on their shoulders that has guns in the church. They're literal battle cathedrals. And there are some, actually, that quite literally constantly play at, like, the loudest volume you can possibly imagine. They sing Imperium of Man, like, hymns and shit while they're in battle. It's crazy. You know, and that's not even taking into consideration the Adeptus Sororitas's battle churches, which is something that is equally fucking insane. But so, like I said, they're literally the size of the Statue of Liberty in terms of height. They have churches on their back and are capable of wielding such ferocious level of firepower that they can bring entire planets to their knees, basically on their own. That being said, the Imperium of Man can't make more anymore because dumbass Mechanicus lost the blueprints for it, the STC. In fact, in Warhammer 40k lore, we're seeing even less and less of these Reaver Titans, and it's believed that the STCs have probably been lost for the Reaver Titan as well. But regardless, we're not here for 40k. Pax class are roughly more or less the same height, but just the sheer level of durability that they have is just insane. Like, Lux and Albin class are plated in solid corrodium armor, and oftentimes each plate layer of armor is at a very minimum half an inch to 1 full inch. Half an inch on Lux class, 1 full inch of corrodium plate on Albin class. And there's oftentimes multiple layers of armor behind each plate. These things are fucking tanky as hell. Compare that to Pax class, which have a Solstite corrodium composite armor. This means that it's largely corrodium, but it has a little bit of Solstite sprinkled in here and there, kind of like fairy dust, you know? It has like a Solstite coating, which makes it even more durable. Now, we just got done with that, but there's one Pax war machine in specific that has gained a legendary title within the Cyratin Empire and pretty much every faction that they fought against with this thing. This specific Pax class war machine has its own name, and it is known as Pax Dominus. Now, Pax Dominus is fucking ridiculous, and we just got over Pax class. It stands at a grand total of 155 feet tall, is armed in 8 WMD weapons, 3 support systems, and 3 auxiliary systems. It has 2 layers of null shields and 2 layers of mega carrier class null shields, and is powered by 3 Solstite reactors. This thing is an absolute behemoth, even when compared to other Pax class war machines. The level of destruction this thing is capable of unleashing on any battlefield is unthinkable. Like, it's already unthinkable the amount of damage that a Pax class, an Alban class, a Lux class can do. Which, fun fact, other than a few exceptions, all 3 Cyratin War Machine classes can field the exact same weapons. This means that the giant, horrifying guns on a Pax class can be mounted to a Lux class, the small scouts that are oftentimes hunting in packs, which means depending on what enemy you're fighting, you can do significantly more damage with just a hunting party of Lux class war machines than you can with a single Pax class. It's insane the amount of firepower that these things are capable of carrying. Pax Dominus, on the other hand, has its own unique weapons, which is a great segue into War Machine weapons themselves. Now, there's not a lot of them. I haven't made a whole lot of them, but we do have some. So, the first ones that we have are WMD class, and we have 2 in total right now, aside from the ones that are Pax Dominus exclusive. So the first one is known as the Halitosis class Ballista. Now, we've talked about ballistas in the past, and no, I'm not talking about a medieval ballista. In In Shattered Legacies, the Cyratin Empire's Cyratin Marines have what are known as ballistas, and they're basically, think a shotgun that is fully automatic that fires deer slugs that are the size of 40 millimeter impact grenades, with rockets strapped to the back of them, and the material that these things are made out of are solid uranium for sheer armor penetration. That's a ballista. They literally punch a hole in anything. Now, are they better than bolters? The Astartes' bolters? No, because they're not explosive, but for the most part, they do the same job. You know, whenever you're pointing this thing at, it's not going to live unless it has significantly powerful armor, you know? But typically when you're sending Cyratin Marines at anything, ballistas are usually enough. They have another weapon known as the Ballast, which is basically a heavy ballista. Bigger, higher rate of fire, slightly larger, essentially deer slugs. You know, higher velocity. The rockets on each projectile burn a lot harder, which means their velocity is significantly faster. Recoil is insane, but then we have, like I said, the Halitosis class ballista. And the Halitosis class is actually very, very different from the ballista that we just described. What it is a 120 millimeter explosive shell Gatling gun. This means that it fires explosive shells that are 120 millimeters out of what is essentially a mini gun. And depending on how many mountings they could have 1, they could have 4, because fuck you. The problem with these is that they're not particularly armor penetrating. They're specifically used for anti-infantry, and oftentimes are reserved solely for Lux class, as that's kind of what Lux class really specialize. When you get Alban and Pax class, it's oftentimes they're sent to fight war vehicles that are on par with them, which, again, I don't have an official title for this, but Cyratin war machines are essentially the secret special weapon, even though it's not a secret, of the Cyratin Empire. For the Baramon, you have the Scarred Dexes. For the humans, I don't remember if we talked about them in the humanity episode. They have something known as Cyclops. And then the Florians also have their own super weapon or secret weapon or whatever. We haven't talked about that one yet, but we will talk about that one. But these are basically war machines or war vehicles that are essentially Warhammer 40k Titan equivalents. They are vehicles or machines that are designed to obliterate entire armies on their own. Now, Scarred Dexes are very similar to Halo Scarabs. They're good at killing things, but they aren't necessarily the best. Cyratin war machines are the best, whereas the Cyclopses from humanity, they're mainly used tactically, but they do have ones that can go on the main battlefield. But regardless of that, they're oftentimes insanely heavily armored. They have weapons that can more or less take down massive swaths of troops, and are oftentimes set in for either apocalyptic situations or situations that would necessitate this level of specialization and firepower. But so, like I was saying before, Lux class is largely designed for infantry, dealing with infantry, gaining information for the larger war machines, whereas the Albin and Pax class, like I said, are more so designed to deal with war vehicles that are particularly powerful or other super weapon-like war vehicles. That's largely what they do. Next up, we have... Where's the other WMD? We have the Hellblaze Lance Battery. Now, the Hellblaze Lance Battery is nothing super fancy. It is essentially a plasmite lance array straight off of a Cyratin Void chip. Because they basically looked at these plasmite cannons on a Void chip and like, let's mount that shit to a robot. And so they did. It's literally like when there's a lance strike, a cannon from the side of a ship in orbit that strikes the planet, that is what they have as a WMD weapon on these things. It is basically a giant fuck-off laser beam made of plasmite that basically is Duran in a laser beam. It just melts through anything it comes into contact with, just instantly emoliating it. Now let's go on to our support weapons. As like I said, support weapons are more... They're not weapons that are utilized very often, but they're weapons that are certainly incredibly useful in specific situations. The first one is known as the Tananka Graviton Array. Now, the Tananka is a incredibly devastating weapon that is oftentimes more of a weapon of mass destruction than the actual weapons of mass destruction. What it is it's a containment field, and inside of it is extraordinarily strong gravity. And they basically just lash this thing out like a whip. I believe 40k has something similar. And as you can imagine, whatever it touches, it instantly compacts it down into something the size of a marble. Because the level of gravity that is suddenly inflicted on whatever it touches is essentially the same as a black hole. That's essentially what they're throwing around. They're throwing a black hole that's in the shape of a whip. Now, it isn't just capable of doing this. In situations where something is far too close for the pilot's own liking, it's capable of firing off basically like a shock wave that does the same thing. It's basically like a hemisphere, like off of the planet, like a hemisphere shockwave that fires out, and anything that is in front of it will get immense amounts of gravity damage. It'll compact down. It's kind of like those videos that you can find floating around YouTube, like the oil drum or the can of pop, where you start vacuuming out the air and then all of a sudden it just crumples in on itself, is that exact type of situation. Only instead of crumpling inwards towards the center of the machine, it literally rips that chunk of metal off and then crumples it down into, like I said, like the size of a marble. Now, the shockwave is significantly less powerful. The level of gravity intensity, shall we say, isn't nearly as high as with that quote-unquote whip. Needless to say, though, it's essentially like a shotgun, If you get close enough to a shotgun, it will fuck your day up. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about that. If it's loaded with buckshot, you're going to be very, very unhappy for a very short amount of time. And that's kind of what it's designed as. It's designed as more of a very deadly deterrent rather than an actual mainstream form of offense, It's basically there to symbolize, get the fuck away from me. I need my personal space. You're invading it, The other support class weapon is known as the Queston Planet Cracker. The Queston is ridiculous. It's basically a giant artillery shell, or a giant artillery piece. And it quite literally fires shells at either semi-automatic or, in very rare cases, pushing the systems of the Queston to its limits, fully automatic, and they basically fire thermobaric nuclear warheads without the nuclear part. The giant mushroom cloud blast that occurs from a nuclear weapon is that same yield of explosive, just without the uranium, without the nuclear part that makes it so quote-unquote dirty in terms of like fallout and stuff like that. And that's basically what it's designed to. And keep in mind, these weapons that I'm describing right now, these are the weapons that can go on any war machine. Like literally a Lux class that is like the size of this Warhound right here can have a Queston Planet Cracker. It can have a Tanaka Graviton Array. Like, these are weapons that any Cyratin war machine can field at any time, and the weapons are fully modular. They can be taken off and reattached in different locations on different mechs at any given time, so long as they're within their basically repair shop. So it's not like, oh, here comes a Lux class. The worst they're going to have is a Halitosis class ballista that is designed for anti-personnel rather than anti-armor. No. It can quite literally semi-automatic or in exceptionally dire situations, fully automatic fire thermonuclear warheads at anything. If the pilot decides that thing needs to not exist right this second, they can literally just aim it up and boom, nuclear explosion on that location. Nothing's making it out alive. Unless it is something that has shields or an absolutely ridiculous amount of armor. And even then, even if it has the armor to survive it, the crew is probably dead. We're not messing around here. The crew is probably dead from the explosion alone. So let's go on to the final ones, which is the auxiliary systems. And we actually have 4 in total. Only 2 of them have been named. So the first one is known as the Mevalon generator. The Mevalon generator is the biggest fucking war crime system you could possibly imagine. So we've talked about psionics before. And I already know there's a few people that are going to be like, oh boy, not psionics again. Because that was a somewhat complex episode. But they took psionics, and there is a psionic ability that can quite literally just cause a person to go insane. And so they took this idea, and they made it a giant bubble that they can now attach to a certain war machine. And oftentimes they attach them to Lux class because Lux class are fast. It's literally essentially like an energy field that goes out, I don't know, maybe 150 meters out from the Cyratin war machine. And any person that enters that field, that bubble, is either, depending on the intensity of the field, is either very slowly or very quickly brought to just like frothing at the mouth, insane berserker rampage, and will just turn on one another. Now, these things are exceptionally rare. Any Cyratin war machine can field these, but it requires the pilot to be a psionic wielder and has to have the psionic phenomena to power this thing. We're talking psionic wielders that are very high on the list. You know, we're getting close to alpha grade at this point. These are exceptionally powerful psychic wielders. And to find a psychic wielder that can actually pilot a Cyratin war machine, it's like winning the lottery of multiple lifetimes. You know? Like, let's say we have a Powerball that is worth trillions upon trillions of dollars, and it's been out there for like 7 generations. You would have to win that lottery. You know? That literally 700 years, let's say, this is being a little optimistic, but 700 years this lottery has been going on. Nobody has ever gotten the lottery. You would have to win that lottery to find a psionic wielder that can pilot a Cyratin war machine that is strong enough to power this field. And it's basically impossible. And when it comes to Warhammer 40k and their pilots, the Princeps, the Imperium, and more specifically the Mechanicus, will go to insane lengths to recover the Princeps. Because Princeps are fucking hard to find. It's the same way with the psionic wielder pilots in Cyratin war machines. The Cyratin Empire will literally throw every single resource they have at a problem to ensure that that psionic wielder makes it out alive, no matter what it takes. They will literally sacrifice legions of Cyratin war machines to recover this one singular psionic wielder, because they are that rare and that important. Because this brings up the second device or auxiliary system. This one doesn't have a name, but it's also psionically powered, which is why I'm bringing it up with the Mevalon generator. It's basically, so what the fuck are they called? They're called Cytitans, but I forget exactly what their Legio is. I want to say Tempestus Scion, but I know that's not right, because I'm pretty sure Tempestus Scion is something else. Regardless, so within 40k, so you have Titans, and bear with me when I say this. Titans are comparable to Astartes. Now, I know the fucking heresy that I just said. This fucking tiny dude is comparable to this thing, but just give me a second, okay? Let me cook. So this Astartes is comparable, or I guess this Astartes is comparable to a war machine, because there is another group of Astartes known as the Grey Knights. Now, this is specifically for my Warhammer 40k fans. You probably know who the Grey Knights are. And they are the equivalent to Cytitans. So the Grey Knights are basically a chapter of Astartes that are like goated beyond belief, are literally like, what was it? They have the genetic information of the Emperor of Mankind in them or some shit like that. They're exclusively demon hunters. Every single one of them is like an insanely overpowered psyker. They hunt demons. They basically just chill in Khorne's backyard sometimes. Like, they have so much fucking plot armor on them. It's disgusting. They have like almost like Primarch level plot armor on them. Like, it's insane. But so, the fact of the matter is that the Grey Knights, when you try to, Apologies. Something's going on with my throat. But so, when you try to compare the Grey Knights to the Astartes, you can't really do that because the Grey Knights are just so much more powerful. Now, as I had said, the Astartes are comparable to Titans, and what I mean by that is that the Astartes and Titans are, I don't want to say inferior because I don't think Cytitans are really inferior to most standard Titans, but it's basically like on the same playing field. Now, of course, I'm kind of dancing around this. What is a Cytitan? A Cytitan is literally a Titan, like these big motherfuckers, that have psychers as their princeps. And it's crazy because, granted, the Cyratin Empire has done this through pure technology, and all it requires is basically the psychic energy of a psionic wielder. Cytitans are quite literally capable of teleporting around the battlefield. Literally. Something this big that if we're rough balling it, we'll say is maybe close to 70 to 80 feet tall, which I don't even think is the actual height of a Warlord Titan. This giant fucking piece of metal teleporting anywhere it wants, and suddenly it's there. It has wickedly powerful shields, and it just shot you with a giant plasma fuck-off laser. And that's a Cytitan. There's more to Cytitans, but it's basically like the main reason why I compared Astartes to Titans and Grey Knights to Cytitans is because if you're seeing an Astartes or a Titan, you're having a really, really bad day. Like, seriously, you are having a really bad day. If you're seeing a Grey Knight or a Cytitan, you're not making it out alive. And even if you manage to survive the battle, Grey Knights will oftentimes consider you have been in some way, shape, or form exposed to chaos. You must be killed now to ensure that it does not spread. Bam! You're dead. And it's not heresy. And Cytitans are kind of the same thing. Like, everybody will just be fucking shot on sight because these things are so secretive that the Imperium doesn't want you knowing they exist. You know? So it's like, if there are Titans and there are Astartes, your day is really, really bad. But if you're lucky, you might live to tell the tale another day. But if there are Grey Knights or there are Cytitans, you're not making it out alive. I'm sorry, but that's game over. You're game over. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. I don't know why I just did video games and then Monopoly. But regardless, you get the idea, you know? But so, the whole point of this little side tangent that honestly didn't have much of a point is the fact that Cyratin war machines, again, necessitating this lottery of multiple lifetimes psionic wielder, they're capable of short-range teleportation. Now, when I say short-range teleportation, I'm talking upwards of a maximum of a mile away. Now, this requires a ridiculous amount of focus from the psionic wielder. Because, again, you're taking something this big and teleporting it somewhere else via something that is not solely technology and electricity. And as you can imagine, trying to do such a thing would put an unimaginable amount of stress on the human, or in this case, Cyratin mind. In some cases, the person who is doing the teleporting isn't even the pilot. It's literally a psionic wielder that is basically strapped into a makeshift seat next to the pilot that will probably die in the attempt of moving that much matter to a new location. Like, for this teleportation, There is no if, ands, or buts. If you want the psionic wielder to live, they have to. They have to be alpha class. They have to be alpha grade psionic wielder. They cannot be anything else. They will not survive. Even if it's a beta. Beta is directly below alpha. They will not survive. And then again, you need an alpha grade psionic wielder, which again is like winning the lottery of multiple lifetimes, finding one that can actually pilot a Cyratin war machine, which is another lottery of multiple lifetimes, and then one that can actually physically do it without instantaneously dropping unconscious or dead on the spot after teleporting. Needless to say, Cyratin war machines that do have psionic wielders, they're oftentimes permanently interred inside of the Cyratin war machine, and they are suspended in time to ensure that they do not age until they are required for battle. Then they are brought back into mainstream time. The suspension is deactivated. They do whatever the fuck they gotta do, teleporting around, whatever it may be, and then they're resuspended in time to ensure that the next time that we need this guy, he's still alive. Because they are that rare. Now, within 40k, I believe that Cyratins are still almost equivocally rare, but not like as rare as within the Cyratin Empire. Now, with all that out of the way, we can finally go to our third auxiliary weapon after that massive freaking yammering, that massive tangent. That massive rambling is the word that I was trying to think of. This is known as the Bastion module. Not a super fancy name. You know, it's not as fancy as the Mevalon generator, the Queston planet cracker, the Tananka graviton array. You know, it's not as beefy sounding. The Halitosis class ballista. You know, those sound kind of beefy. You know, they sound like something that would just take something in his bare hands and just punch it in the face, you know? And then you have the Bastion module, which doesn't really sound that impressive. It doesn't sound beefy, you know? But it is beefy. It is an omnidirectional shield. Now, what does that mean? Think Overwatch and Reinhardt's shield. We've actually talked about this specific thing. It is the same levels of shields that are used on shield frigates within the Cyratin Empire, or the Cyratin Navy. They are shields that face a singular direction. They're basically just like a big rectangle, kind of like Reinhardt's shield, and they're literally omnidirectional. You point them in one direction, you have a shield in that one direction. They are insanely tanky. Like, these things can take ridiculous amounts of damage. They can take significantly more damage than a standard bubble shield. But it only protects from that angle, and they're not easy to move. Now, Bastion modules are the same thing. And oftentimes, if a Cyratin war machine that is expecting heavy firepower towards it, they'll oftentimes take a Bastion module. And it's literally just a giant rectangle shield that is in front of them. You know, the long way of the shield is straight up and down, so it covers the entirety of the Cyratin war machine. And anything that is directly in front of them, unless you're slightly flanking enough to where you can get around that shield, nothing's getting through. And the great thing about these is that the standard shields of a Cyratin war machine are largely powered by the reactor. But Bastion module shields, these omnidirectional shields, they have their own capacitors inside of the module itself. So it's literally, these things are charged up, then they're cut off from the reactor. Because when the main shields are taking damage, the reactors of Cyratin war machines essentially go into like overdrive. Because they have to produce more power to sustain the shields because they're taking such heavy firepower. But obviously, if it takes too much damage, the reactor can't keep up with it, the shield fails, and it collapses. That's how it works. Well, this obviously can cause somewhat minor, all the way up to major, all the way up to cataclysmic amounts of damage to the reactor. by it constantly being cycled into this overdrive because the shields are taking too much damage. And a lot of times when you see Cyratin war machines fighting, the shields will drop. They don't pop, because if you let them pop, that means that the reactor is going essentially into like critical overdrive to the point where it's going to start taking damage. So sometimes when a shield is taking too much damage, the pilot will literally just drop the shield to ensure that the reactor doesn't go critical, because we're talking about plasmite and solstite reactors. Plasmites, whilst it won't kill the planet, it'll put a big fucking dent in the planet and probably obliterate the battlefield it's on. Solstite reactors, as I've said before, are essentially equivalent to supernovas, the death of a star. Like, these things go off, there's nothing on the planet that is going to survive it. Which is why they're given to Pax class, because they're essentially indestructible. That being said, I think Albin also has them. Yes, Albin do as well. But so, the Cyratin Empire will go to incredible lengths to ensure that Cyratin war machines don't get destroyed. And if they do, the pilots especially will do absolutely everything in their power to ensure that the reactor doesn't go critical, that it doesn't suffer what is known as a reactor death, where the reactor goes critical or it's destroyed and detonates. Because, as I just said, that can cause really, really big problems, especially when you're fucking around with solstite reactors. They are insanely dangerous. But so, the final auxiliary system that we're going to talk about for just the standard Cyratin war machines doesn't have a name, because I haven't thought of one yet, but it's basically a self-contained cluster of nanomachines. Now, nanotechnology is only recently coming out for the Cyratin Empire, so for a long time they didn't have access to this. But so what this container of nanomachines does is they're self-replicating and they are very malleable, meaning that the nanomachines can reconfigure their design to tailor to various different needs. And what these nanomachines do is, when the Cyratin war machine takes damage, these nanomachines will be deployed and patch up or outright repair minor to moderate damage. If it's severe damage, like one of these gun arms falls off because it suffered too much damage, the nanomachines can't fix that. They can patch up the stumps so that you don't have essentially electricity arcing all over the place and, just actual damage, especially if it's like a chest plate armor piece here. But they won't be able to repair major or cataclysmic damage. They're basically designed as a patch job. You release the cloud, it self-replicates on the spot constantly to fill in minor or moderate damage. Usually if it's moderate damage, it's a temporary fix. If it's very minor damage, it's a permanent repair that can be done. And you really don't see this very often on Lux class. You'll see them every once in a while on Albin class, but for Pax class, they're almost always seen on them. Now let's get to Pax Domitus's exclusive weapons. Some of these are absolutely stupid. I'm not even going to use the word ridiculous, because at this point, it's not even ridiculous. It's just stupid. So, the Cyratin Empire, a very, very long time ago, had a mining operation. They were using various different energy drills to quite literally blast the rock apart, melt it, whatever. And mining was going very good, when suddenly the essentially borehole that they had this massive cataclysmic shockwave-like explosion travel up the shaft and absolutely eviscerate the laser mining drill. I say laser, it's not actually laser, but you get the idea. They immediately launched an investigation. They thought that perhaps it was a pocket of gas that had a reaction with the plasmite or whatever substance they were using, but they didn't find any gases. They immediately assumed, well, maybe we just vaporized the entire pocket. So they sent in for a new drill. Mining immediately commenced, and the same shockwave occurred once again, completely totaling the drill. Well, now the Cyratin Empire is curious. What in the hell is down there that is causing this? Because once again, there's no gas down there, unless it's a gas that they cannot detect, which, if there is a massive problem because they don't know the potential health effects. The only thing that's down there, though, is this really, really weird, hyper-fragile quartz-like substance. They thought, well, that's weird, but whatever. So they took a little bit of it to analyze it because they didn't really know what the hell it was. And they put it on a table. And one of the maintenance workers is walking by and, butterfingers happen. Dude, fumbles his wrench and it hits this quartz-like substance. And all of a sudden, the table just shatters. And everybody looks at it and they're like, what? What the hell just happened? What did you do? And he's like, I just dropped the wrench on it. The quartz-like substance is gone. It's completely, turned into dust. The table has been completely obliterated. Now the Cyratin Empire have a very, very, very big interest in what the hell this quartz is. So they extract some as carefully as possible, and they start doing various different tests. This substance would later be known as balzatite. And balzatite is like I said, a very, very fragile quartz-like substance that has a inexplicable effect on reality around it. What it does is when any form of force is inflicted on balzatite, it instantaneously magnifies that force by several hundreds of times and distributes it evenly across its entire surface. And so, dropping something like just a metal wrench on it, suddenly it was essentially like dropping a boulder onto the table. The balzatite turns into dust immediately because it's far too much force. But this force travels through basically the directly adjacent substances. And the Cyratin Empire, being the Cyratin Empire, immediately thought up a truly horrific weapon and used balzatite as the primary ammo. This weapon is known as the lightning hammer. Basically what they did, they took balzatite, they turned it into a rod, and in between multiple rods, they put down an incredibly powerful substance, maybe something like titanium or even adamantium. Or not adamantium, corrodium. As sort of like spacers. And then the Cyratin Empire, being the Cyratin Empire, having absolutely no concept of the meaning of overkill, decided, okay, so it magnifies and inflicts several hundreds of times worth of force, depending on what force is exerted on it. Let's fire this fucker at light speed and see what happens, which is exactly what they did. The lightning hammer fires a balzatite rod, or a cluster of balzatite rods at light speed. Upon impacting the ground, the first balzatite rod shatters instantly and inflicts several hundreds of times worth of light speed kinetic force onto the terrain around it. The corrodium spacer is the next thing that hits, and then the next balzatite rod. And basically what it does is it creates these massive planet-ripping fissures across the entire battlefield in less time than it takes you to blink. Hundreds of miles worth of terrain has been ripped up in what could best be described as a nuclear carpet bombing. And the way that this works is you would think, okay, well, when the first balzatite rod hits, the one directly behind it after that corrodium spacer would hit the corrodium spacer, and the energy would be inflicted on the corrodium spacer. But that's not how it works. It's fired at light speed, but there's an ever so slight minuscule delay. It fires that first rod and then the spacer just to make sure that the balsatite rods don't hit one another. Then it fires the next rod, then the next spacer, the third rod, the third spacer, the fourth rod, so on and so forth, depending on just how much stuff they want to flick the middle finger at. And that's how it functions. It literally just fires these rods that multiply any force that is exerted on them by hundreds of times at light speed. Because they can. This weapon is classified as a WMD weapon for Pax Dominus. It is one of the 8 weapons that is mounted onto Pax Dominus as its main battle weapon. That being said, this is also one of the weapons where tether relay doesn't really function with it because there's some sort of weird exotic energy with tether relay that somehow interacts with balsatite, which causes massive fucking explosions every single time it gets near a tether relay. So they're like, okay, we're not putting it anywhere near this because I don't want to deal with those explosions. Let's see. The next one is, once again, a very, very new WMD weapon for Pax Dominus. This weapon didn't previously exist. In really old versions of Pax Dominus, the majority of its weapons were the standard War Machines weapons. You know, like the Halitosis class Ballista, the Hellblaze Lance Battery, the Tanaka Graviton Array. You know, it used a lot of that with the Lightning Hammer in addition. This new weapon is known as the Star Striker, and it is specifically an antimatter laser. It is a beam of antimatter, which is the direct opposite of matter, and it quite literally just, like, even saying that whatever this laser touches is vaporized is incorrectly, because it's antimatter interacting with actual matter. It basically just obliterates one another in an instant. And as a result, it's one of the only weapons out there that can quite literally... You can literally fire this thing in an arc going left to right, and it's like those memes of the anime character swinging their sword the same way, and like an entire mountain all of a sudden just pops up, cut completely in half, perfectly straight line. You know? The Star Striker can literally do that. Obviously, the mountain won't pop up, but it instantaneously removes the material it comes into contact with from reality, and then the mountain would basically fall down on top of itself. And that's just what the Star Striker does. Now, to be fair, the level of power requirements to fire this thing, even for 1 second, goes well beyond what Pax Dominus's power capabilities are, because Pax Dominus has 3 Soul-State reactors. To fire the Star Striker for 1 full second would completely drain the reactors of all power that is being produced right now. That's how much power requirement, that's how much power consumption the Star Striker has. As a result, despite the fact that it's a WMD weapon, it's used incredibly tactically, almost like a support weapon. You know, they'll fire it for a quarter of a second at whatever they're looking at, and that thing is just removed from existence. Next up, we have a weapon that I believe we've talked about before, but we never went in depth with. And the original purpose of this weapon was actually to be mounted on Pax Dominus. As of the moment of the lore, it is banned by every single major and minor faction that exists in Shattered Legacies. Every single one of them, including the Cyratin Empire, who's the one who made the fucking thing, looked at this thing and was like, no. Just no. And it wasn't even actually made. It was only in the blueprint stage. So technically this was never mounted on Pax Dominus because this never actually existed. But basically, some chucklefuck scientist, that has to be a mad scientist at this point, somewhere off in the Cyratin Empire at a black site, made the blueprints for this and was like, ha ha, the perfect weapon, and then slapped it down in front of anybody in any faction, and they looked at it and they immediately went, "Ha! No. Absolutely no." This weapon is known as the Vortex Cannon, and it is classified as a null void weapon. The Vortex Cannon cannot be confidently described. Nobody truly understands how it functions, even the person who literally made the blueprint for it. Whatever it does, it is theorized to have such a volatile reaction with reality itself that it quite literally and forcibly rips reality apart, causing a null invasion. This is when the null void starts to bleed into mainstream reality. As you can imagine, when we talked about the null void, this is a really big fucking problem, because so there was a person in the community that had said, Blight Plague seems to be such a massive problem. Why not just get rid of it before it becomes a problem? Well, you can't really. I mean, if you discover an instance before it really starts popping off, yeah, you can get rid of it, and then that instance won't exist anymore. But a lot of times, the information the Cyratin Empire has on the Blight Plague comes from realitorial anchor zones, which are areas that are basically disconnected from reality. They can survive literally the end of reality, and they hold all sorts of different technology, blueprints, and information from the Cyratin Empire. So oftentimes when the Cyratin Empire, a brand new one, first encounters the Blight Plague, they have no fucking clue what it is. They think, oh, this is just a really weird looking sludge. Let me poke it with a stick. Holy shit, everything is on fire. That's how it works, almost every single time. And even the Cyratin Empire, who has all the details and will oftentimes try to give those details to other factions because they realize, holy shit, this is a problem. A lot of times, the other factions either don't believe the Cyratins on just how big of a problem it is, or they just simply haven't been informed yet, so the same thing happens. A Blight Plague instance is allowed to run wild and get to the size of a Plague Fleet. And that's not even taking into account Plague Fleet Leviathan. Which, to put this in perspective, Plague Fleet Leviathan had not only a solar cruiser, a spaceship the size of a damn solar system constructed solely to suppress it, but the Cyratin Empire also sent 2/3 of the Holy Armada. The Holy Armada, that fleet that they have that can't exist within a single universe simultaneously, yeah, that Holy Armada, they sent 2/3 of that with the HMSSA Dawn's Light after Plague Fleet Leviathan, in quote-unquote containing it or attempting to destroy it, and it broke containment. Like, literally, the only reason why Plague Fleet Leviathan was there in this quote-unquote quarantine is solely because Leviathan wanted to be there. For whatever reason, it wanted to be there, and then when it got bored, it's like, I'm leaving. There's not a damn thing they could do to stop it. That's how much of a problem Leviathan is. And oftentimes, Leviathan is always the very first instance of Blight Plague to ever exist. So it's basically a non-stop perpetual issue. But so, the member of the community was like, well, why not just toss Blight Plague into the Null Void? It sounds like a good idea in theory, not so much in practice. What I mean by that is, we as the outside viewers, we kind of have a firm understanding of what the Null Void is. We know that it's an absence of reality in the truest sense of the word. Like, it is such an absence of reality to say that there is nothing inside of the Null Void implies that there is something inside of the Null Void, which is nothingness. It is less than nothingness. The problem is that even gods don't know this much information, and the Cyratin Empire knows even less. They know that it's a problem, they know that it's dangerous, and they know that it's wiping people from reality to the point where they never existed in the first place. That's why they have the Monument of the Lost. But the Cyratin Empire doesn't know enough about the Null Void to justifiably say, let's throw the Blight Plague in there. Because for all they know, it could just be one really weird fucky wormhole that all of a sudden they throw the Blight Plague in there. Yay, it's no longer a problem where we are. But for all they know, it could be a problem somewhere else that somebody else has to deal with. So they're not really willing to throw anything in it. Not only that, but there are two primary fleets within the Cyratin Empire. There are assault fleets, sometimes recategorized as death fleets, and then there are exploration fleets. Assault fleets are exactly as they sound. These are warships. Exploration fleets usually don't have a lot of warships. These are oftentimes ships that are outfitted with various different sensors. They're exploring. They're trying to figure out what the fuck is out there. Warships oftentimes don't have sensors that can even detect the Null Void. Oftentimes these sensors are exclusive to exploration fleets, and even then it's not even guaranteed that an exploration fleet will have sensors that are calibrated to pick up the Null Void. And when I say that, it's not like the Cyratin Empire are like, okay, this exploration fleet is most likely at some point going to encounter Null Void. Let's just boop, bop, boop. This thing can now pick up the Null Void. No, it's like we're scanning for a very specific thing, and it just so happens that that exact same frequency is also the Null Void, so they can detect it. So a lot of times, the Cyratin Empire and other spacefaring factions, they have the constant issue of ships, entire fleets, just being erased from reality, and nobody remembers them ever existing in the first place, because they can't detect that a null invasion is directly in front of them, and they sail into it, and they cease to exist, and they never existed in the first place. That's how much of a problem null invasions and the Null Void is, and this is exactly why the Vortex Cannon was outright banned, because you can't detect it. You would think, okay, what is the absence of reality? Well, it's probably black. You know, you would assume it has to have a color. It's probably black. So if you're on the surface of the planet, you can probably see this massive cone of blackness. Don't touch it. Except the Null Void is less than nothingness, which means it doesn't even have a color. It's completely invisible. You could literally be standing at the end of your street. If you take one step forward, you're in the Null Void. You literally can't see anything. You can see right through it. You can see the other side. And it doesn't look like... It's not like Photoshop, where you just take something out of a picture and then there's just a void there. It literally doesn't look any different. Even if it's carved into the planet, your mind will automatically reassert that despite the fact that that land doesn't exist in reality, it's still there. Because it doesn't make sense for it not to be. The mind in Shattered Legacies will still try and fight to have some form of normalcy. That's why when people talk about relatives that now no longer exist and never exist in the first place, their mind will gently push them away from the topic, because it's trying to reassert normalcy. Because trying to think about it, who knows what could happen to your mind? It would literally just break trying to think of the Null Void and the fact that somebody existed that doesn't exist in the first place. And so the Cyratin mind, the human mind, the Florian mind, whoever is looking at it, they'll just see uninterrupted terrain. Despite the fact that if they move their toe even just like half of a footstep forward, it just ceases to exist. You never had a toe to begin with. You know, that's the problem of the Null Void. And also the problem of the Vortex Cannon, because it causes null invasions to occur just by firing it. And that wasn't even the intention when the dude designed it. But that's what it does. And that's how dangerous this thing is. Now, there are other realities, shall we say, where Vortex Cannons have been used. And it's gnarly, the effects that happen. So, going over the side tangent of what a Vortex Cannon is, as well as to answer that question that the member in the community had. That's why the Cyratin Empire doesn't use the null void, because they don't have enough information and they just outright cannot detect it. Because it's like, okay, if we can detect it and we can confidently say that this region of reality is a null invasion, you still have to get the Plague Fleet to follow you, and more importantly, follow you into the null void invasion. Even if you fly around it, it's probably going to follow you around it. It's not stupid. It can follow you, and it can recognize those ships are moving in a very specific pattern. Maybe there's something here. Maybe there's landmines that I can't detect, or space mines, or something. So it'll follow those ships, rather than risking going in literally beelining it. Blight Plague has intelligence. In fact, if it's a Plague Fleet, it has super intelligence. Like, these things are not to be fucked with. And you can't really outsmart them like you would with an animal, you know? If you get a predator chasing you and you go around a trap or you jump over a trap, it's not going to think, I wonder why it did that. It's going to think, that prey is obviously scared, I need to go even faster. And then it falls into the pit trap or whatever it is that you have there, you know? The animal isn't really going to think twice because they don't have enough mental capacity for such a thing. The Blight Plague most certainly does. And it can tell a ruse when you try to give it one. Anyway, let's move on to the next weapon. This is going to require another side topic. The next weapon is known as the Void Lightning Gauntlet. Now, we haven't talked about Void Lightning before. Void Lightning, you would be forgiven for assuming it has something to do with Null Void, simply because of how it functions and interacts with reality. But it has nothing to do with the Null Void. In regions of space, like the literal void of space, in regions that have seen particularly potent naval battles, we're talking like mega carrier death fleets going up against mega carrier death fleets, a unique phenomena can occur. Because there is such high yield and exotic energy weapons that are being fired, it quite literally charges the void of space, and a unique phenomena known as a void storm will start, and this void storm creates void lightning. The Cyratin Empire and the Florians have yet to find a single substance that can withstand void lightning, as it can quite literally cut through anything. Armor, hull, shields, even mega carrier class null void shields. It can cut through them like a warm knife through butter. There's literally nothing that can stop it, which is why you would assume this must be somehow adjacent to null void. But no, you still remember that the damage happened. You still remember how the ship was before the void lightning literally decided to shoot through it like a shotgun shot. You know, you still remember that. It's not erasing that thing from ever having existed in the first place. And this is why oftentimes areas that have seen such heavy fleet versus fleet combat, they'll just be outright avoided. Even if there's no proof that void lightning and a void storm is in the area, they'll be avoided just to be safe. Because with lightning in real life, how it works is it's charged particles. Either the ground or the clouds will either be positively charged or negatively charged. And it's because of those opposing charges that an electrical current will go through, i.e. lightning strikes. You know, to be fair, is the normal person going to be able to pick up on these positively or negatively charged particles? No. You know, I would assume, I don't know much about lightning, but I would assume you need specialist equipment to pick that kind of stuff up. Void lightning doesn't have the same thing, and it doesn't even necessitate the existence of a void storm. The void lightning can just happen. Well, you shouldn't be surprised by this at this point. The Cyratin Empire, being the Cyratin Empire, decided to take the concept of void lightning, and they were like, I wonder if we can weaponize this, because of course they would. Turns out they somehow did. We're not entirely certain how. It wasn't a machination of the Techno Jacksons, so there is an explanation somewhere. We don't know where, but there is a explanation somewhere. It's in one of the realitorial anchor zones because they keep on making it, but we don't have access to that information. And you'll find that sometimes in Shadow Legacies, like I said before, sometimes when I say there's just no information, it's because there's literally no information. There are also situations where the Cyratin Empire, they're very much... It's not like governments in the modern day. You know, if there's something secretive that the government needs to kind of keep a secret from the general population to prevent, like, panic and stuff, they'll keep it secret, and the population will never know. Like, the quote-unquote aliens debate. You know, is the government hiding aliens? Imagine if that information was made public, what would happen? Potential hysteria, potential riots, potential idiots being idiots, you know? You might want to hate on them all the time, but a lot of times, if you just stop and think about it for a second, you're like, yeah, that makes sense why the government would keep it secret. Like, if there was actual intelligent life, yes, the population should know about that, but at the same time, are we as a species mentally stable enough? Not even like as a country, as a species. Are we as a species mentally stable enough to know this information? Probably not. There would probably be mass hysteria. There would probably be riots. There would probably be idiots trying to release the fucking aliens whose intentions we don't know, because chances are they're probably hostile because they can be hostile, you know? It's like this information has potential severe ramifications to society as a whole. You can hate them as much as you like, but sometimes information being withheld is very important. The Cyratin Empire, on the other hand, keeps almost no information withheld. Now, yes, they do have information that is secret, but it's oftentimes secret for now. You know, if it's like a black site and they're experimenting with something that it might be a little morally dubious in its early stages, the population doesn't need to know about that, you know. But once it gets kind of like, you have your first prototype, you have your first couple of prototypes, the system is starting to get refined, then they'll be like, hey, check out this shit that we made. And people are like, huh, that's really cool. There are certain things that the Cyratin Empire will even keep secret from itself. It's exceptionally rare, such as the recipe to Solstite. Obviously, Soltech Conglomerate knows the recipe. They're the ones who made the fucking recipe. But we don't know how it's made because they're not sharing it with anybody. Even us as an outside viewer aren't capable of figuring out the secret. It's the same way with how this void lightning technology works. The Cyratin Empire, on some level, somewhere, understands how this technology works. But they keep it so goddamn secretive that even we, as the outside viewers, have no way of knowing how it works because they've kept it that secret, you know? And let's be honest, some of it is just down to I have no fucking clue how it would work. I mean, I can probably spitball some random bullshit explanation, but let's be honest, void lightning that can cut through any material like it's a warm knife through butter, you explain to me how you can turn that into technology, because I have no fucking clue. That's the real crux of it, but that's the real reason behind it. But for simplicity's sake, let's just say the Cyratin Empire isn't telling us, because that's way cooler. But so, they literally made technology that allows them to harness void lightning. And what's the first thing that they do? Let's put it on a massive fucking, like, fist, coat it in void lightning, and then punch something really hard with it. That's the Void Lightning Gauntlet on Pax Dominus, and is classified as a WMD weapon. Next up, we have a support weapon, and we are getting close here to the end. I'm pretty sure we're going nearly on 2 hours now, because I'm definitely feeling it in my voice. I have to remember how to even say this word. Calistin, I believe. Calistin class Lance. It's nothing super fancy. I'm going to be honest. It's nothing super fancy. It is literally an industrial mining laser. They literally took one of their most powerful industrial mining lasers and stuck it to the giant robot. Why? Why the fuck not? It can easily mulch its way through almost any material known to Cyratin kind. Why not put it on a big-ass robot and then have it fire it at enemy robot stuff? Seems like a perfectly logical idea to me. I mean, you don't really need more of an explanation on what it is. That's enough. Big-ass laser. Got it. Understood. The final one, I actually have to remember what the fuck this thing does. This is the auxiliary class system. It's called the Vandrin Denial Array. I'll be honest, I don't remember the details for it. In my notes, I literally have Force Shockwave. I don't remember what it was. I could probably spew some random OP-ass bullshit, but I think we're just going to leave it at Force Shockwave. That's all I have written down. It's literally Vandrin Denial Array Force Shockwave auxiliary class. I don't remember what it was. I've been going strong up until now, and this one I'm just like, I don't even remember. But so, we're going on, I think, almost like an hour 45, so I'm going to call it the episode here. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we are actually getting pretty damn close to being able to talk about the Ruin War. Also, I have thought up basically like arcs. Not the game arc, but like different like arcs in a story or a show or stuff like that for each and every single main era, shall we say, within Shadow Legacies. And so the arc that specifically has the Ruin War in it is now known as the Tides of Ruin arc. So we're getting close to the Tides of Ruin arc as well as the Ruin War proper. We need to talk about a few more technologies that are incredibly relevant to the Ruin War, as well as probably all of the Cyratin calamities that were involved in the Ruin War, which I think is 5 calamities, I think. So we're getting really damn close. We might talk about a few of the gods, the more major gods that were involved, but we're really close. We're finally getting to the point where we can get to talking about the Ruin War, which, holy shit, this is going to be such a massive episode. Oh my god. That might have to be a multi-part episode, I'm not going to lie. But there's a lot of things that go down in the Ruin War alone, never mind the era that leads up to the war itself. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys are looking forward to Saturday and Sunday's streams at noon Central Standard Time. Saturday is RimWorld, Sunday is Sunday Night Live, where I pick a random game and we game it out. I have not recorded the next episode of Modded Survival, not that it matters, because I still, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's a file problem or what the hell it is, but I cannot get those episodes to upload. I don't know why. So I'm going to see if maybe it's something wrong with OBS and Minecraft, which doesn't sound like a possibility. I have no idea. Maybe it's just a YouTube problem. It just doesn't like the audio or the video files, which doesn't make sense because it's been doing the Shattered Legacies ones perfectly fine. I'll figure out something. We might not have, again, episodes on Wednesday and Friday, but I'll try and figure out something maybe for next week. I'm going to continue to try with the Modded Survival. Again, I have no idea why this isn't working. I don't change anything in the OBS. I don't change a single thing in OBS when I'm recording this compared to the Modded Survival. But for whatever reason, those literally just aren't working. But regardless, you guys aren't here for the technical jargon. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys are looking forward to those live streams. Once again, Saturday and Sunday, noon Central Standard Time, where we're doing RimWorld, and Sunday Night Live, where I pick a random game and we game it out for 2 hours. Then coming right back here next Tuesday for our next Shattered Legacies deep dive. So, until then, guys, see ya.